In August 1944, Adolf Hitler issued one of the most insane orders of the entire war. He commanded that Paris be destroyed, every bridge blown up, every monument demolished, every landmark reduced to rubble. If Germany could not hold Paris, then Paris would cease to exist. The man responsible for carrying out this order was General Dietrich von Choltitz, the military governor of Paris. He had the explosives, he had the engineers, he had the authority. One word from him and the Eiffel Tower, Notre Dame, the Louvre, and everything else that made Paris beautiful would be gone forever. Hitler called him repeatedly, screaming into the phone, "Is Paris burning? Is Paris burning?" Choltitz had a choice. He could obey his orders and destroy one of the greatest cities in human history, or he could disobey and face execution for treason. He chose to disobey. This is the story of how one German general saved Paris from destruction and what it cost him to do it. Dietrich von Choltitz was not an obvious candidate for heroism. He came from a long line of Prussian military officers. His family had served German rulers for generations. He was raised to believe that a soldier's highest virtue was obedience. Orders were orders. You followed them without question. Choltitz had proven his loyalty to Hitler many times over. He had commanded troops in the invasion of the Netherlands in 1940. He had led the assault on the fortress of Sevastopol on the Eastern Front, one of the bloodiest sieges of the war. He had earned a reputation as a reliable commander who got results regardless of the cost. When Rotterdam refused to surrender in 1940, Choltitz had helped carry out the bombing that destroyed the city center and killed nearly 1,000 civilians. When Sevastopol finally fell in 1942, the city was a smoking ruin. Choltitz had never hesitated to use maximum force when his orders required it. This was exactly why Hitler chose him to command Paris. By August 1944, the Allied armies were racing across France. The D-Day invasion had succeeded beyond expectations. German forces were in full retreat. Paris, which had been occupied since 1940, was about to be liberated. Hitler knew he could not hold the city, but he refused to let the Allies have it intact. If Paris fell, it would fall as a pile of rubble. The cultural capital of Europe would become a monument to German vengeance. Hitler summoned Choltitz to his headquarters and gave him his orders personally. Paris was to be defended to the last man. If defense became impossible, the city was to be destroyed completely. Bridges, factories, churches, museums, everything. Paris must not fall into enemy hands in any condition that would allow it to be used against Germany. Choltitz accepted the orders and traveled to Paris to assume command. He arrived on August 9, 1944, with full authority over all German forces in the city and explicit instructions to reduce it to ashes if necessary. What happened next surprised everyone, including Choltitz himself. When Choltitz arrived in Paris, he found a city on the edge of uprising. The French resistance was growing bolder every day. German soldiers were being attacked in the streets. The population was waiting for liberation, ready to rise up the moment the Allies approached. Choltitz also found that the demolition preparations were already underway. German engineers had placed explosives under the bridges across the Seine. They had mined the approaches to major landmarks. They had prepared charges that could bring down Notre Dame, destroy the Louvre, and topple the Eiffel Tower. Everything was ready. All Choltitz had to do was give the order. But something had changed in Dietrich von Choltitz. The meeting with Hitler had disturbed him deeply. He had seen Hitler up close, and what he saw frightened him. Hitler's hands trembled. His eyes were wild. He ranted about traitors and secret weapons and final victories that existed only in his imagination. Choltitz had begun to suspect what many German officers already knew, but could not say aloud. Hitler was insane. The war was lost, and following Hitler's orders would accomplish nothing except senseless destruction. The question Choltitz faced was whether he could bring himself to disobey. For a Prussian officer, disobedience was almost unthinkable. Choltitz had spent his entire life following orders. His identity, his honor, his family tradition all depended on obedience. To disobey was to betray everything he had been raised to believe. But destroying Paris would serve no military purpose. The Allies would liberate the city whether it was intact or in ruins. The only difference was whether one of the world's great treasures would survive or be lost forever. Choltitz began to delay. When Berlin demanded reports on the demolition preparations, Choltitz sent vague responses. When they demanded a timeline for destruction, he cited technical difficulties. When they ordered specific bridges destroyed, he found reasons to postpone. Meanwhile, he opened secret communications with the Swedish consul, Raoul Nordling. Nordling served as an intermediary between Choltitz and the French resistance. He also helped Choltitz make contact with the approaching Allied forces. Choltitz was playing a dangerous double game. He was pretending to follow Hitler's orders while actually negotiating the peaceful surrender of the city. If Berlin discovered what he was doing, he would be arrested and executed. His family would be punished. Everything he had worked for would be destroyed. But he kept going. The situation in Paris grew more volatile every day. On August 19th, the French resistance launched an open uprising. Police stations were seized. Barricades went up in the streets. German soldiers came under attack throughout the city. Choltitz had the firepower to crush the uprising. He had tanks, artillery, and thousands of troops. Hitler's orders were clear. Any resistance was to be met with overwhelming force. The city was to be pacified and then destroyed. Instead, Choltitz negotiated a truce. Through Raoul Nordling, he arranged a ceasefire with the resistance. German forces would remain in their strong points. The resistance would stop attacking. Both sides would wait for the Allies to arrive. It was an extraordinary arrangement. A German general was essentially agreeing to hand over the city peacefully rather than fight to the death as ordered. But the truce was fragile. Hardliners on both sides wanted to keep fighting. Some German officers believed Choltitz was betraying them. Some resistance leaders believed the truce was a trick to buy time for demolitions. And Hitler kept calling. Every day, sometimes multiple times a day, the phone would ring with Berlin on the line. Is Paris burning? Hitler wanted to know. Why are the bridges still standing? Why hasn't the destruction begun? Choltitz made excuses. He lied. He said the demolitions were proceeding according to plan. He said the resistance uprising had complicated the timeline. He said he needed more time. Hitler was not satisfied. He sent direct orders to the demolition teams, bypassing Choltitz. He commanded that the destruction begin immediately, regardless of what the military governor said. Choltitz intercepted these orders and countermanded them. He told the engineers that nothing was to be destroyed without his personal authorization. He was risking everything on the hope that the Allies would arrive before Hitler's patience ran out. On August 24, 1944, the first Allied forces entered Paris. The French 2nd Armored Division, commanded by General Philippe Leclerc, had raced ahead of the main Allied advance specifically to liberate the capital. American forces were close behind. The moment Paris had waited 4 years for had finally arrived. Choltitz watched the Allied tanks roll into the city and knew his gamble had paid off. The bridges were intact. The monuments were standing. Notre Dame, the Louvre, the Eiffel Tower, all of them had survived. But he was still a German general commanding enemy troops in a city being liberated by enemy forces. The war was not over for him. On the morning of August 25th, French and American soldiers surrounded the Hotel Memoirs, where Choltitz had established his headquarters. Fighting broke out around the building. German soldiers were killed and captured. The end was approaching. Choltitz could have ordered a last stand. He still had troops who would fight. He could have died defending his headquarters in accordance with Hitler's orders to resist to the last man. Instead, he surrendered. French soldiers entered his office and found him waiting calmly at his desk. He handed over his pistol and allowed himself to be taken prisoner. The military governor of Paris, the man Hitler had trusted to destroy the city, walked out of the Hotel Memoirs as a prisoner of war. As Choltitz was driven through the streets of Paris, crowds of celebrating French citizens surrounded the vehicle. Some wanted to kill him. They saw the German uniform and remembered 4 years of occupation, 4 years of humiliation, 4 years of suffering. But Choltitz was protected by his captors and delivered safely to Allied custody. He would spend the rest of the war as a prisoner, then return to Germany after the conflict ended. The question of why Choltitz disobeyed Hitler has been debated ever since. Choltitz himself offered several explanations over the years. He said he could not bring himself to destroy such a beautiful city. He said he realized the war was lost and saw no point in senseless destruction. He said he wanted to save German soldiers from dying in a hopeless battle. Some historians are skeptical of these noble explanations. They point out that Choltitz had shown no hesitation about destroying Rotterdam or Sevastopol. They suggest that his real motivation was self-preservation. He knew Germany was losing the war and wanted to position himself favorably with the victors. Others argue that the truth is probably complicated. Choltitz may have had multiple motivations, some noble and some self-interested. Human beings rarely act from pure motives, especially in wartime. What cannot be disputed is the outcome. Paris survived. The bridges stood. The monuments remained. The city that had taken centuries to build was not destroyed in a few days of demolition. Hitler was furious when he learned that Paris had fallen intact. He demanded to know why his orders had not been followed. He screamed about traitors and cowards. He ordered that Choltitz's family be punished for his treachery. But by August 1944, Hitler's power was fading. The machinery of terror that had enforced his will was breaking down. Choltitz's family was not harmed. The war would be over in less than a year, and Hitler would be dead by his own hand. Choltitz returned to Germany after the war and lived quietly until his death in 1966. He never faced trial for war crimes, despite his role in the destruction of Rotterdam and Sevastopol. The Allies apparently decided that saving Paris outweighed his earlier actions, or perhaps they simply had too many war criminals to prosecute and not enough time. He wrote a memoir called Is Paris Burning? That told his version of events. The book became a bestseller and was later adapted into a major film of the same name, starring an international cast including Gert Frobe, Orson Welles, and Kirk Douglas. The film brought Choltitz's story to a global audience and cemented his image as the savior of Paris. But not everyone accepted this image. French historians pointed out that Choltitz had overseen the deportation of Jews from Paris during his brief tenure as military governor. Resistance fighters who had lost comrades during the uprising questioned whether he deserved praise for simply not committing an even greater atrocity. German historians noted that Choltitz was not the only officer who disobeyed Hitler in the final months of the war. As defeat became inevitable, many German commanders found ways to avoid carrying out senseless orders. Choltitz was perhaps more dramatic than most, but he was part of a broader pattern of crumbling obedience. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, famous for her analysis of the banality of evil, might have found Choltitz an interesting case. Here was a man who had participated in genuine atrocities without apparent moral qualms, then suddenly discovered limits to what he would do. What changed? Was it the target? Was it the certainty of defeat? Was it something personal that we can never know? These questions have no definitive answers. Choltitz took his true motivations to the grave. His legacy remains controversial. Some see him as a hero who saved one of the world's great cities from destruction. Others see him as a war criminal who only discovered his conscience when it was convenient. The truth probably contains elements of both. What is certain is that Paris stands today because one man chose to disobey orders. The Eiffel Tower still rises above the Seine. Notre Dame still anchors the Ile de la Cité. The Louvre still houses treasures collected over centuries. Millions of tourists still walk the streets that German engineers once prepared to destroy. None of this would exist if Dietrich von Choltitz had followed his orders. The story of the German who saved Paris is not a simple tale of heroism. Choltitz was not a good man who stood up against evil. He was a complicated man who had done terrible things, and then, at one crucial moment, refused to do one more terrible thing. Perhaps that is the most realistic kind of heroism. Not the heroism of saints who never waver, but the heroism of flawed human beings who find, somewhere within themselves, the strength to say no. Hitler asked if Paris was burning. Choltitz made sure the answer was no. Sometimes one decision, made by one person at one moment, can save something irreplaceable. Dietrich von Choltitz made that decision in August 1944. Whatever his motives, whatever his flaws, that decision preserved a city that belongs not just to France, but to all of humanity. Paris did not burn, because one German general decided he would not be the man who destroyed it. If you want to hear more stories like this, consider subscribing to the channel. We uncover the untold stories of World War II, the ones that history books left out. See you in the next video.